The alarm went off at 5:15 a.m., the same as it had for years. Not because I needed to be up that early, but because I preferred the quiet. The house was still dark. Boise mornings usually were, especially in early spring. I moved carefully so I wouldn't wake Lily. 11 years old, light sleeper. I paused outside her room for a moment, listening to her breathe, then went downstairs and made coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the backyard. Nothing remarkable. Fence needed repainting. Grass coming back slowly after winter. The kind of ordinary details you only notice when life is stable. By 6:10 I was in my truck, heading toward the office. I'd been doing this route long enough that I barely thought about it. Same roads, same timing. If I hit the lights right on State Street, I'd be pulling into Glen Cove Logistics just before 6:30. That gave me a full hour before most of the building filled up. I liked being first. It let me think. Glen Cove sat on the edge of an industrial park. Concrete, steel, nothing pretty about it. But it was familiar. I'd watched the place grow from a modest regional operation into something much bigger. When I started, we had 30 trucks. You knew every driver by name. Now we were managing over 300 vehicles across the Northwest. I parked in my usual spot, grabbed my thermos, and went inside. The building smelled faintly of printer toner and diesel. Night shift dispatchers were finishing up. A few nodded as I passed. "Morning, Aaron." Morning. No rush, no tension. Just another Tuesday. I settled into my office, powered up my computer, and opened the overnight reports. That was always my first step. Accidents, delays, mechanical issues. Anything that might ripple into the day's routes. There was a storm system pushing east through Oregon. Not severe, but enough to slow things down in the mountain passes. I made a note to reroute 2 long-haul trucks, give them an extra buffer. One of those drivers, Seth, preferred later runs anyway. Better to adjust now than deal with phone calls later. This kind of decision never showed up in performance metrics. It didn't need to. It kept things running smoothly. By 7:15, I'd already adjusted 3 routes, flagged 1 warehouse manager who needed a heads-up call, and sent a quiet note to dispatch about Redtail Meat's early delivery window. Nothing dramatic, just small corrections, applied early. That was the job. 12 years of it had made the work feel almost invisible. When things went right, no one noticed. When they didn't, everyone did. At 7:42, my calendar pinged. Meeting, operations alignment, 8 a.m., conference room B. That was unusual. I hadn't seen the invite until that morning. It wasn't from my assistant, and it wasn't a meeting I'd scheduled. I frowned slightly but didn't dwell on it. Meetings popped up all the time now. Ever since the investors brought in new leadership, the calendar had grown crowded with alignment sessions, strategy syncs, and technology briefings. Still, I closed my reports and headed down the hall. Conference room B was already occupied. Dustin Langford sat at the head of the table, jacket still on, tablet in front of him. He'd been CEO for just under a year, polished, confident. The kind of executive who spoke in complete sentences even when making small talk. To his right was Kayla Mers, our Chief Technology Officer. Sharp, energetic, always enthusiastic about systems and scalability. I respected her, even when I didn't agree with her. There was also someone else, a young man I recognized vaguely from IT. Cody, I thought. He stood when I entered, then sat back down quickly, unsure of the etiquette. "Morning, Aaron," Dustin said. "Thanks for coming in early." "Always do," I replied, taking a seat. The door closed behind me. There was a brief pause. Not awkward exactly, more deliberate. Dustin folded his hands. "We'll keep this short." That was when I knew. Not panic, not anger, just recognition. The kind that comes when enough small signals finally line up. Kayla glanced at her tablet. Cody stared at his hands. "Aaron," Dustin began, "you've been instrumental in building Glen Cove's operations. No one disputes that." I nodded once, said nothing. "But," he continued, "as we modernize and scale, the board believes we need to fully embrace data-driven solutions." Kayla leaned forward. "Our new system, Fleet IQ, has been in beta for several months. It integrates real-time traffic data, weather models, fuel optimization, predictive maintenance. We're seeing measurable gains. She spoke confidently. She believed it. Cody looked up briefly, then back down. Dustin slid a thin envelope across the table. It stopped just short of my hand. "We're moving in a new direction." The words were delivered calmly, professionally, no malice in them. I didn't touch the envelope. "So where does that leave me?" I asked. Dustin exhaled, almost relieved I'd said it for him. "We're offering a generous severance, 6 months' salary, extended health benefits. We'd appreciate your help with the transition over the next 2 weeks, but it's not required." Kayla added, "The system has learned a lot from your historical decisions, but Cody here will be overseeing operations going forward." Cody nodded, face tight with a mix of pride and discomfort. I thought about a lot of things in that moment. About Ashbury Dairy's unloading constraints. About which drivers hated downtown Boise after 4 p.m. About the way Red Tail Meats expected their calls early. Not because it was efficient, but because it made their day easier. None of it belonged in that room. I stood up. "I'll clean out my desk today," I said. Dustin looked surprised. "You don't have to rush. It's fine." I picked up the envelope, nodded once to Kayla, once to Cody, and walked out. No arguments, no explanations. Silence felt more appropriate. By 11 a.m., I was driving home. The passenger seat held a cardboard box, photos, a snow globe from a client in Montana, and a worn leather binder I'd kept for years. Notes, exceptions, names, patterns. Things the system had never asked about. The city looked different at that hour on a weekday, too bright, too open. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. The house was quiet. Rachel was at work, Lily at school. I set the box down in the kitchen and didn't open it. Instead, I poured myself a drink, then poured it down the sink. There would be time later to understand what this meant. For now, it was enough to acknowledge one simple fact. Something important had been set in motion, and it wasn't finished yet. The first few days passed quietly. Too quietly. I updated my resume, adjusted my LinkedIn profile, and sent polite messages to contacts I hadn't spoken to in years. People responded with sympathy, surprise, and the occasional offer to keep an eye out, all well-meaning, none concrete. The logistics market in Boise wasn't large, it never had been, and at 40 I was no longer the young manager with limitless flexibility. I had experience, yes, but experience is only valuable when someone knows how to use it. Rachel noticed the shift immediately. "They didn't just change systems," she said one evening as we sat on the back porch. "They replaced you." She worked in tech. She understood patterns. I wanted to believe Glen Cove was different. "They can't automate relationships," I replied. "They'll see that." She didn't argue. She just squeezed my hand, the way you do when you already know how a story is going to unfold. A week later, the messages started. They weren't dramatic, just short texts, calls that ended with a sigh. Seth, one of our senior drivers. System routed me straight through downtown at 5:00, no flexibility. Lindsay from dispatch. Fleet IQ rescheduled Red Tail's meat delivery to after sunrise. They don't accept that. Another driver. System doesn't factor in the dock delay at Meridian. Been waiting 40 minutes. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I no longer had standing. I wasn't part of the system, and systems don't like outside input. Still, I noticed something else. The complaints weren't about errors, they were about context. A month after my termination, Ashbury Dairy pulled their contract. 3 late deliveries, thousands in spoiled product. Glen Cove's largest account, gone. I heard about it secondhand, through an old colleague who still had access to the internal reports. He didn't sound angry, just tired. That same week, I received a call from Nora Vincent. She didn't waste time. "It's their loss," she said. "Would you like to get coffee?" Nora ran operations at Porter Hollage, Glen Cove's primary competitor. We'd crossed paths for years, respectful rivals, same territory, different philosophies. I hesitated. Working with Porter felt complicated. But coffee wasn't a contract. We met downtown, Mid-morning. Quiet cafe. No rush. I'll be direct, Nora said. We're not trying to replace people with software. We use technology to support judgment, not eliminate it. She paused. Let that land. We could use someone like you, initially as a consultant. For what? I asked. To help us understand the things systems miss. She didn't say Glen Cove's name. She didn't have to. The offer wasn't generous, but it was real. I accepted. Porter was smaller, about 150 trucks. But their operations floor felt different, less sterile. Dispatchers talked to drivers like colleagues, not data points. The software made suggestions. Humans made decisions. Within weeks, patterns emerged. Ashbury Dairy came up for rebid. I pulled out the leather binder for the first time since leaving Glen Cove, not because I needed it, but because it grounded me. The notes were reminders of how decisions were made, not instructions. We tailored Porter's proposal to Ashbury's actual needs: cold chain timing, dock layout, driver experience, things that didn't show up in optimization dashboards. We won the contract, $3 million annually. 2 weeks later, Dustin Langford called. His voice was different, less confident, edges softened by urgency. We're having some transition issues, he said. Fleet IQ needs guidance. He offered consultant rates, double my old salary. You want me to compress 12 years into 2 weeks, I said. That's the idea. I declined, not out of anger, out of clarity. You made a choice, I told him. So did I. I hung up and felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph. Relief. The next call came from Red Tail Meats. Then Eden Fresh Organics. Same reason every time. We heard you're with Porter. Porter didn't celebrate these wins. They documented them. Quietly adjusted capacity. Hired carefully. 6 months later, Nora was promoted to COO. I became operations director. Glen Cove, meanwhile, began layoffs. The irony wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. One afternoon, I sat alone in my office after everyone had gone home. The building hummed softly. Servers, HVAC, routine systems doing routine work. I opened the binder again, not to read, just to remind myself what it represented. Not knowledge, but judgment. And judgment, I was beginning to realize, was something no system could inherit. 8 months after I left Glen Cove, Dustin Langford walked into Porter's headquarters. I was in a meeting reviewing quarterly performance metrics when my assistant stepped in quietly and handed me a note. Visitor in reception, says you'll want to see him. I excused myself and walked down the hall. Dustin looked smaller than I remembered. Same suit style, but looser now, hair thinner. The confidence he used to carry so effortlessly had been replaced by something heavier. We shook hands. Thanks for seeing me, he said. Of course. We sat in a small conference room. Glass walls, neutral space. I'll get straight to it, he said. Glen Cove is finished. He said it without drama, just a statement of fact. Fleet IQ never adapted, he continued. Clients left. Drivers left. The board is preparing for bankruptcy. I listened. No satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of inevitability. I'm here with a proposal, Dustin said. Porter could acquire what's left. Fleet, contracts, infrastructure. It would be cleaner than liquidation. I didn't answer immediately. That's not my decision alone, I said. You'd need to speak with our CEO. I have, he replied. She said the final recommendation would come from you. Nora joined us soon after. We reviewed Glen Cove's books line by line. There was value there, equipment, routes, people, but only if handled carefully. A week later, Porter announced a partial acquisition. We took the best assets, the reliable drivers, the contracts that still made sense. We left Fleet IQ behind. Dustin resigned quietly. The transition was methodical. No press releases, no public commentary. 1 year after my termination, I stood in my office overlooking a fleet larger than anything I'd managed before. 400 trucks, 2 cultures blended into one. Marcus, my assistant, knocked. All systems normal, he said. Ashbury delivery arrived early. Red Tail's en route. Eden Fresh loading starts in an hour. The software behaving? I asked. It suggested a detour, he said. But Johnson called in. He's been running that route 15 years. Knows a better one. And? Marcus smiled slightly. We authorized the change. I nodded. That afternoon, I placed the leather binder on a shelf behind my desk. I no longer needed it, but I kept it, as a reminder, that some things aren't stored in systems. They're carried by people. 2 years after the acquisition, Porter Logistics no longer felt like a company reacting to change. It felt settled, not static, just grounded. We'd expanded into neighboring states quietly. No announcements beyond what regulations required. Growth came through steady additions, trucks purchased when demand justified them, drivers hired through referrals rather than mass recruiting campaigns, systems updated only after field testing with people who would actually use them. The operations floor had its own rhythm now. Dispatchers trusted the software enough to listen to it and trusted themselves enough to override it when necessary. No one was punished for judgment calls as long as they were explained and documented. That single policy did more for morale than any incentive program ever had. One morning, I arrived early as usual. Old habits stay. A small package sat on my desk. Inside was a model truck painted in Porter's colors. A handwritten note rested beneath it, to the man who reminded us that the best system still needs a human mind behind it. I placed it beside the snow globe from Glen Cove, which now sat on the windowsill catching the morning light. 2 objects. 2 eras. Neither obsolete. That afternoon, my phone rang. A national logistics firm. Large footprint. Sophisticated technology stack. We've been watching your performance, their CEO said. Your hybrid model is outperforming both traditional and fully automated operations. We'd like to explore a partnership. I thanked him and said we'd review the proposal. After the call, I didn't feel excited. I felt cautious. Not because growth was dangerous, but because direction mattered more than scale. That evening, driving home, I passed one of our trucks returning to the depot. The driver recognized my vehicle and gave a short honk. I raised my hand in return. A small gesture, still meaningful. At home, Rachel and Lily were waiting. Dinner was already on the table. Normal, familiar, the kind of stability that only becomes visible after you've nearly lost it. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Rachel asked, "Do you ever miss Glen Cove?" I thought about it. "I miss what it was," I said, "not what it became." She nodded. That was enough. A year later, I was invited to speak at a logistics technology conference in Seattle. The topic was human-AI collaboration. I stood at the podium, looking out at an audience filled with people who reminded me of earlier versions of myself. Confident, curious, convinced they were building the future. The failure of Glen Cove, I told them, wasn't in adopting technology. It was in believing technology could replace experience. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. After the talk, a young woman approached me. Bright, thoughtful, introduced herself as Emma Chen. "I was an intern at Glen Cove during the transition," she said. "I'm finishing my PhD now, human-AI collaboration models." She smiled. "Glen Cove is one of my case studies." I laughed softly. What not to do? Exactly. She joined Porter a month later. So did Cody, eventually. He came to my office one afternoon, years after everything had fallen apart. "I tried to argue against full automation," he said quietly. "I just didn't have the authority." People change when they're allowed to learn. We hired him, not to replace anyone, but to contribute. 5 years after I carried a cardboard box out of Glen Cove Logistics, Porter had become the dominant regional carrier. Business schools wrote about us, competitors studied us. The industry slowly shifted away from blind automation towards something more balanced. At a company gathering marking the anniversary of the acquisition, I stood in front of 500 employees. Drivers, dispatchers, analysts, engineers. "I was once told my experience was obsolete," I said. That efficiency meant removing the human element. I paused. They were wrong. No applause at first, just quiet attention. What we've built works because it respects judgment, because technology serves people here, not the other way around. That was all. No speeches about victory, no celebration of failure elsewhere. just clarity. The next morning, I arrived early again. The operations center was already active, systems running, people talking, decisions being made. On my desk, the binder remained unopened. It didn't need to be opened. Its lessons were already in the walls, the processes, the culture. When a new driver later asked whether he should follow the system's suggested route or the advice of a veteran colleague, I answered without hesitation. Listen to both, I said, then decide. Because in the end, that was the lesson Glen Cove learned too late, and Porter understood just in time. Technology can process information, but only people can understand what it means, and some things, no matter how advanced the system, simply can't be programmed.